Welcome to another episode of Eagles Edge. We're just going to talk about the Eagles Chiefs game coming up. I'm going to be fielding questions live, so as people roll in here, I invite you to write in the chat. If you want to ask a question, head over to YouTube and you can do so. So obviously, this is the Super Bowl rematch, and it begs the question, what are the teams going to do differently? And overall, the rosters are not that different, which is atypical from what you normally would happen season to season. So I do think a lot of the differences in the outcome are going to be predicated upon schematic changes and then just obviously the variance that happens within football generally. For those who haven't seen it, I wrote a 2,000 word game preview, which is on Patreon, um, and also going on Reddit. So I'd invite you to go check that out. In my research, I think, let's just go unit by unit, and then I'll kind of talk about some players. For people who are just joining us, go ahead and ask questions in the comments. This episode is going to be dedicated to answering your questions. So as some of these questions come in, I'm just going to start talking about the game and then we'll get into it. Chiefs offense. This year, it's clear that they want to open up the offense a little bit more. We saw it in the preseason. We saw it in week 1, even though Xavier Worthy went down. They brought in Tyquan Thornton and they threw a bunch of deep shots to him. They connected once. They know that it's not necessarily sustainable offense when they're nickel and diming all the way down the field because their set of receivers, especially with Rice and Worthy out, are not that dynamic. So teams can come out and they can play man coverage and they're not going to be able to get a lot of separation. They're not going to get a lot of yak opportunities. They no longer have their superstar tight end. He's just a good tight end now. So understanding all that, they need to open up the defense by making them respect the vertical more. And I think they're going to commit to that. Now, currently, I don't think they have the players to be able to pull that off. So in this specific matchup, I don't really worry about the Eagles getting beat deep. So what is likely to be effective? We saw in week 1, they just kept picking on Adoree Jackson, and obviously it was exacerbated by the fact that Dak and CD is such a strong connection. Those are really good players in general. A lot of people, Vic said right now, yes, when he was asked if Adoree is the starter, and people kind of ran with that. Do I think that is set in stone? No. I'm curious to see ultimately who will come out there. But if he does start, what I'm really looking for is that cushion. When it's in that 8 to 9 yard range, it's dicey, especially against the Chiefs, who are going to run. One of the routes that they constantly run is what essentially looks like a sight adjustment, where the guy just immediately starts looking back at the cornerback, kind of angles in, and the pass is already ready to be received. It's not really a real route. And what a sight adjustment is at the line, if the quarterback and the receiver see a favorable look, generally when the defense is presenting a blitz, they're going to modify their route in real time so that they're ready to just counter it instantly. But the Chiefs, they'll just run routes within their standard offense that are akin to that over and over again. And there's lots of names: search routes, stab routes, hook routes, hitches, comebacks, stops, all kinds of stuff. And they'll run a series of those. And all that to say, those are easy victories if you're playing with a big cushion. And you don't want to let them just march on the field because those are high percentage passes. You want to make them complete a few moderate to low percentage passes to actually move down the field. I got a few questions coming in here. Is Tanks Bigsby here to be an exclusive kick returner? And how will the defensive line look different with the new addition this week? I'll just leave this on the screen. The answer is no. Tank Bigsby is not just a kick returner. Do I think that his kick return value made it easier for Howie to justify the value of giving up an extra late round pick? Yes. But you don't give up a fifth and a sixth for a guy who was the lead back last year in Jacksonville if you don't expect him to play him on offense. And I will say, I think he's dramatically better at running the ball than Shipley. And he's got a lot more juice than Dillon. I like Dillon. Like, if you told me that Dillon would get 4 or 5 carries a week and an reception, I would not be upset. I don't think the Eagles want to use him that much. He does seem like more of a reserve short yardage back who can come in if Saquon's gassed in those situations. And that's fine. Bigsby is as close as you can be to like a feature type back without actually being a feature back. I do think a good analogy is what David Montgomery does in Detroit. Now, is he as good in pass pro as David Montgomery? No. Is he as secure with the ball as David Montgomery? Absolutely not. He's actually a fumble machine. And I've done studies on fumbles. They're highly volatile. What you did in college isn't necessarily predictive of what you'll do in the pros, but he's been worse in the pros than he was in college, and he was already bad. And he already just bobbled one in a practice on a kickoff return without being touched. So, yes, it is a real issue, but does it preclude you from going after someone of that talent? In my mind, no. You can get a fumble back. You can fix fumble issues. And the Eagles have a good running back coach. So it's a gamble I'm worth taking. Receiving is another area where he's not going to offer much. Yet, can he catch a swing pass? Yes. Can he catch an over the ball route? Yes. Can he catch a screen? Yes. Can he do anything beyond that? Probably not. And that's okay. But just you're putting him in shotgun and you're running outside zone or some gap scheme. I think he's a good back. Yeah, and a lot of the things like what you saw in Saquon in New York when he didn't have room to operate and then he got in the open field and that momentum unlocked everything for him. And once he was able to get to the Eagles where he wasn't being contacted at or behind the line constantly, he took off. And it wasn't that he just got behind a better offensive line and better scheme and etc. He got better. Saquon legitimately got better. When he was in the open field in New York, sometimes he was so infrequent that he would panic and run into a guy or make a bad read with his eyes or juke when the guy's 8 yards away and then kind of stumble into him. But that didn't happen in Philly. So the same thing you could say at times with Jacksonville, where there's a lot of times where it was like halfback dive into a mess of bodies and you're not getting much. But then when they got him on the perimeter, it was like, look out. This guy is dynamic. He's got crazy jump cut. He's got great power. He's got great acceleration. He's a fearsome runner who also has the big playability. So I think it's a great pickup. Getting the second part of the question, as more people are coming in. It's regarding the defensive line. Just want to see if we can share the link here real quick. Yeah, and if you're in here, throw more questions my way. It's appreciated. And otherwise, I'll just kind of talk about the game generally. Will the defensive line look different with the new addition? And there's two new additions: Jalen Carter and Zadarius Smith. So 100% the defensive line will look different. Some people were getting on Ojomo because he didn't flash on the broadcast. And Dak Prescott said how their whole protection scheme changed when Carter went out. I call BS. They were doubling Ojomo, who basically moved into the spot where Carter was constantly. And I should have charted it, but just from what I saw in film, it was at least 60%. And that's a conservative estimate. Like, it was a vast majority of the snaps. And I'm not talking necessarily about overt doubles, but whether it was like a combo block or he's slanting or twisting across and multiple guys are getting hands on him. Like, there's, it's a nebulous definition of double team. But in terms of you need to beat multiple guys to get to the quarterback, it was like 60-70% of snaps. He's not going to win those. Is Milton Williams better, more capable of winning those? Sure. Do I care? Not really, because taking up two still matters. And that won't be the case going forward. When Carter's in, he's the guy who's going to see all those bodies. And then Ojomo's going to have one-on-ones. And when he was in his one-on-ones, which he had about 4 or 5 of them, maybe 6, 2 times he lost, 4 times he won. And he won quick. So this guy is still lethal. Everything I said about him in the offseason is still true. Carter probably going to build on what he's already done. So I think he'll be great. Zadarius Smith, Johnny Page did a great breakdown. He is in a power rusher mold. When you put him out wide and you give him a runway, build up momentum, the way he rushes, in my mind, is sometimes he'll do these frantic arm movements and makes it really hard to get hands on him. But other times he kind of just does this technique. It's a true bull rush, but when you really get all of it's hard to describe, like putting your body in an orientation where you can transfer all of your power into the offensive lineman. So all your joints are stacked perfectly. Jared Verse is a great example of someone who does this. You can generate sustained knockback. Zadarius Smith is great at doing this. And so what that does is it collapses the pocket. It makes it so there's less escape lanes. So then when the quarterback, if they want to go up the middle, okay, now maybe you're in the waiting arms of Carter or Ojomo. You want to go out the other side? Oh, maybe there's Nolan Smith. Maybe there's Jalix Hunt. So that's going to have a multiplicative effect in my mind. Now, the gravy is that you can put at him as a stand-up rusher in the interior, and he can juke the shorts off the center. Now, given how the Eagles roster is composed and the type of alignments they play, do I expect to see that very often? No, but it's an ace up your sleeve. So I think it's an awesome signing. And it probably will take time for him to get in football shape. He even admitted that he was huffing and puffing kind of in his first workouts. So will his snaps be reduced this week, maybe next week? I think yes. It wouldn't surprise me if he got 8 snaps. That would not surprise me at all. But over time, could he build up more into what we saw with Uche did week 1, where he had 19 snaps, 18 of them pass rush? Yes. And I will say, even though he's 275 pounds, At times he's an anemic run defender. What is the reason? I can't diagnose it. Like the strength is obviously there. It seems like it's some combination of want to and technique. It's kind of like, oh, it's not a pass rush situation. And then I'm kind of not going to do much. Now that's not going to fly, but he's not going to be asked to play situations where they're definitely going to run, presumably. All right. Got another. Hey, what's up, Krabby? Got another question here. Larry says, fantasy advice. And I will say this before I answer this. I don't play fantasy. I think it kind of, it's like a mind virus that skews your perspective of real football. I understand the appeal of it, no doubt about it. And I don't condone betting, but I also understand the appeal of that. I will give you advice here. Devontae Smith or Jakobi Meyers? I would go Smith, because if you watched the Chiefs secondary last week, it wasn't pretty. And specifically, sometimes their safeties will sit flat-footed and they're going to watch the film. Spags is going to watch the film and he's going to see, like, look at how many times the Eagles wanted to run these like intermediate in breakers, but the Cowboys safeties sat on them and erased those in zone coverage. And they're like, oh wow, this is going to work. Let's force the Eagles to be able to beat that. Well, when you have safeties who are sitting on those intermediate routes, they're flat-footed often. And the Chiefs safeties don't have good recovery speed. So what am I doing? Instantly, I'm going to have Devontae Smith going to do like a vertical release. He's going to break in like he's running, whatever you want to call it, like a deep slant, somewhere between the slant and a post. And then you're going to have the flat-footed safety drive on it. And then boom, he's up the field and you're going over the top. Now it's ironic because like they had the dagger in the Super Bowl. So does it seem strange that you would scheme up a Devontae Smith deep ball? Perhaps a little bit, but I would still try it. So yeah, I will go Smith there. I also, overall, I'm bearish on the Raiders offense, and it looks like Brock Bowers is out. So like maybe intuition will tell people, oh, bigger target share for Myers. But how about a small receiver with less space to operate because their number one option is no longer there? And then the offense slogs, or they decide to commit more to the run game. That's what I'd be thinking about. So I'd go Smith there. I also think the Chiefs are still going to commit to slowing down the run. So yeah. All right. Got another question here from Garvey. Why did they keep running Saquon up the middle into a stacked box last week? I'll answer that first before I get to the second part of the question. My guess, obviously, I don't know the answer. My guess is I have a few theories. One is ball control. When you're the better team, you want to possess the ball more. You want to reduce the number of total possessions because that reduces variance. And then in games in which there's less variance, the better team wins more often. That's one reason. Another reason is they thought they had the advantage in that. I talked about it in the pregame, which is the Cowboys were a really rough run defense, and they lost their best defender, and they look light in the middle. You should be able to run. What I should have said is spread them out. They always match with a light box, 6 men, and then you bludgeon them up the middle. What the Eagles did is they brought all their tight ends on the field. They brought everyone in the middle, and then they ran into 8-man boxes. Another thing that can be said is you put that on film so that you can then build off of it. So there's kind of two phrases that you may hear within NFL spheres. One is scaffolding. So this is building concepts and sequences of plays on top of each other that complement each other. And constraint plays, which are plays that force the defense who is scouting you and sitting on your staple plays and taking away your best players, designing up specific concepts to make sure they can't do that. And so both of those become relevant here, which is like, if we don't put those 12 and 13 personnel condensed runs on film into stacked boxes, well, then when we set up like that and we run play action, why would anyone react? So there's a few reasons there. And turnover aversion, right? It's a lot of the things the Eagles do on offense is to reduce the chances of turnovers, like throwing 14 to 20-yard routes over the direct to middle, which for some of the offenses in the NFL, generally ones who specialize in like wide zone, under center, and play action stuff, which the Eagles don't really do that. They're constantly spamming those plays, and it's very effective. But they're also throwing about 5 to 8 interceptions a year on those things. The Eagles don't want to do that because they're like, we have a great defense, we have a great run game. Why take on that risk? Second part of the question is, how did the Cowboys manage to stack the box and contain our wide receivers? Well, it's funny because it's a discussion point in our Discord, which is, well, you can't play too high and also stack the box and play zone coverage, but actually you can. Because if a team brings a bunch of tight ends onto the field, brings everyone into the center of the field, well, then you can have whoever your overhang is play inside the box. You can have a corner. They're going to play much tighter, and you're inviting more players into the run fit. So I think it's just a question of, are you using offensive formations that don't allow the defense to do those things? If you play spread, they're either going to have to go to single high if they want an extra guy in the box to defend the run. So generally you're going to be encountering 6 players in the box, which is an advantage for the Eagles. Or they're going to play too high. I'm sorry. Yeah, I mean, if they play too high, they're going to, like I said, they're going to be really light in the box. If they play single high, now you have your opportunities to attack on the outside with your stud receivers. And another thing is the quarterback run game. That is much more potent in these spread attacks. I would love to see, you got AJ out wide over here. You got Devontae out wide over here. You've got Dotson spread. You've got Goddard in the slot on the right. You got Saquon in the backfield to the right. And now all of a sudden you're facing a 6-man box. So you know what's the easiest way to win out of that? You pull a guard, Saquon leads blocks, and Hurts just has it. QB power, right? The numbers game, you're winning the numbers game. You're probably winning the leverage and angles in that, and you're probably going to win the matchups as well. Like, now, in the second week of the regular season, are you going to try like power runs with your quarterback? I understand why you wouldn't want to do that. Although Hurts showed that like he was really good at protecting himself in that first week on scrambles. But then you have a million different ways you can get it to Saquon on those. Same side toss, one of my favorite plays. Just your basic outside zone. And then, screens and so on and so forth. Hurts is also much better at reading the field, in my opinion, in these spread sets. So I just think there's so many advantages with the way the Eagles are constructed and their skill sets. So yeah, I mean the Cowboys, they essentially played no man coverage, outside of snaps that are run plays, which it's hard to tell what they would have been in. And if you saw AJ's interview, he talked about they rolled the zones to my side. Of course, there's not going to be any separation. And to some degree, it's lip service. Like there was opportunities where he could have got open, where he was a little bit slow out of his breaks and he didn't. There was times where the coverage was not strongly rolled over to his side. So there's definitely opportunities to get him the ball. And I'm still like not 100% sure on his health level. One thing I will say is if you look at the timeline, out for 1 month with a hammy kind of deal or limited at practice, that generally indicates a grade 2 hamstring. And the recovery timetable for that is generally in that 6 to 8 week area. Well, we're coming up on 6 weeks now for the next game. So that indicates he may be nearing full health as long as there's no sand is it's ramping up to your max velocity and you're more likely to hurt it in the acceleration phase than you are at top speed. And what you saw with AJ is, yeah, he had a good burst off the line. His long speed looked fine, but it was so ginger when he was kind of stopping and starting. Like he would put his foot in the ground and turn around. And before, like last year, it was like, oh my God, how can a guy that big be that explosive and fast out of his cuts, stopping on a dime? And the first week, it was like he kind of stops, stands straight up, and like turns around. Now, could that be because he just thought that he was bracketed in zone coverage and there was no way they're going to him? Maybe. But I think that remains to be seen. Got a few more questions here. I'll get back to yours, Larry, because we got some others who asked. Okay. Brad Eclipse asks, could you explain completion percentage over expected and why Jalen is always so high ranked in it? I was surprised to see him high again. So I forget if I posted it, but I did look into this, which is the relative contribution to completion percentage over expected for each throw that he made in the game. And that Dotson throw was 15%. So 1 out of 6 total contribution was that one play. So sample size is definitely a factor here skewing it. The important thing to understand is this stat is not created equally depending on what outlet it comes from. Some outlets, it's purely from like charting data. So they'll look at pass location, pass depth, down and distance, time in game, score differential, these kind of things. Field position, big one. And that will create the baseline for expected completion percentage. And then you take the delta between that and if they completed it, and that's the completion percentage over expected. So every single completion is over expected. And I don't know if that's obvious. Like you would never have, unless the expected completion percentage was 100%. But then incompletions are below that level. And that stat is, in my mind, worthless. Not worth valuing at all. It's not even clear what it's supposed to tell you value wise. Like people, some reason, are attributing that as a quarterback stat, even though it's between the quarterback and the receiver and the cornerback. Like it's a 3-person interaction. I don't know how you could possibly attribute that just to the quarterback. Now, next gen stats, they recently upgraded, which was already a good stat. Their version is based off actual tracking data. Where's the receiver? How fast are they going? Where's the defender? How close are they at the time of the catch? Data regarding the actual throw, like the ball traveling through the air and all kinds of stuff like this. Now that's much more valuable. Now it's still not something that you can attribute fully to the quarterback. You could look at Geno Smith, for example, where there were passes where they were incredible passes, but maybe they're just bungled by the Seahawks receivers. Versus throwing to A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith in close quarters, they're much better than the average receiver, and that's going to inflate you. So what are you really trying to characterize there? Like, oh, the A.J. Brown, Jalen Hurts connection completes more passes in tough situations than the average pairing? Well, no, duh. You haven't learned anything from that. But trying to actually answer the core of your question, they throw deep to the outside, and it's low percentage throws, and they complete them more often than other people. That goes, now you go way up. Versus other teams who are like, throwing, short passes over the middle where it's high percent expected. Well, the Eagles are eschewing those throws often last year, potentially this year. So it's more of a sampling bias than it is, oh, Hurts and his receiver duos are like doing something special. Now, they are doing something special. Like it is true that his deep ball placement is fantastic. It is true that in contested catch situations, Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown are fantastic. But I don't necessarily think that comes across in the stat. I actually think it's more of a coincidence that they both tend to be, one intuitively true, the other shows up statistically, than actually a function of it. Which probably sounds like a hot take, but I think the more you understand how this statistic functions, you may start to agree with that. So hopefully that answered your question. Brian asked a follow-up. If that's the case, this must have been based off a different question. Why was Devontae not getting the ball? Well, I wrote a thread in this offseason talking about Hurts against too high zone coverage. He tends to take a long time to throw the ball, and we saw, had he not scrambled, those would have been really long time to throw plays. And when he does throw it, it has middling success. So to me, it's more a product of what are the actual plays you're trotting out on the field? How are you, what is the timing, right? When you're facing 7 and 8 man zone coverages, spacing and timing are paramount. You need to have zone defenders who are conflicted between two different routes, but spaced far enough apart where they can't defend both of them reasonably. And you need to have the quarterback ready to deliver the pass at the moment that the player is in between these zone windows. They just weren't ready to do that. Whether it was the concept or the timing or the spacing, it wasn't conducive to doing that and having high functioning offense against too high zone. So I guess the first question is, if Spagnuolo does that, what are they going to do? I mean, the first thing you can do is spread out the field more. So it makes it more concrete which zone defender you can actually attack. Run players off so that you can isolate that defender, and then you can work them one-on-one on the outside. That's one option, and I think they'd have a lot of success doing that. Other options are you make them scared to death to play that because you have a potent run game. And to me, the Eagles have a better chance of having a potent run game when they spread out the field. And then you can build off of that. So those are some of the reasons that the receivers in general didn't see a lot of passes. And for those who are just joining, I invite you to head over to YouTube, Eagles Pin Poll Network, to ask me questions. I think that's where all the comments come in from that I can read. Adam asks, we're lucky the Chiefs have the number 1 and number 2 wide receivers out. Yeah, there's no doubt. And it's hard to say just with how little we've seen him, but Rashee Rice looked like he was on track to be one of the better receivers in the NFL, in my mind. Probably underrated player. And that would present big problems. Worthy, what he presents is really like some vertical threat. I know he's one of the fastest players in NFL history, but like he can get shoved off his line, disrupting the timing. His game speed is a tick below his time speed. And like in terms of his hands and ball tracking, he's like good, not great. And he does present that threat. But at the horizontal stretch is how the Chiefs were really using him. And that does present a big stress on the defense with the end arounds and the swing passes and all this kind of stuff. And it opens up room for them to hit those little quick hitters over the middle and in the alley. So that's where that hurts. But Rashee Rice against the Eagles, that's really where they're missing him, because he would be able to dust Adoree underneath on the outside, because he's got unbelievable release and quickness, and he's a potent yak threat, one of the better yak threats in the NFL, actually. So it's definitely fortunate that they don't have to face them. They're a whole different offense with those guys, bottom line. Okay, until we get more questions, I'm just going to continue where I left off. Chiefs, they have seemed to eschew the run game. Andy, I mean, this is obviously the plight Eagles fans had with him for years, which is, why aren't you running it? And it hurts. It hurts them. Like when teams can just key on the RPO quick game stuff, they don't have the threats outside to threaten you deep. Mahomes' deep ball seems to be very shaky now. It's a problem. But like, and one of the Chiefs fans asked me, he said, why is it that there isn't more of a run game? Like you got a all pro center and guard, right? Even last year you had 3 Pro Bowlers in the interior. Like you would think that would lend yourself to it. I think it's a few things. I think it's you not committing to the run. Like it seems like Andy spends more time with these like 1960 to 1985 like esoteric run packages in the red zone than he does like, can we actually have like a contemporary run game with bells and whistles that makes it so we can win the numbers advantage and get favorable leverage and angles against defenders to try to actually create space in the run game. And I don't think they do that. Their backs, like, it's still unclear. Like, Pacheco looks like he has most of his juice back, but those guys are not really big play threats. I think their biggest run all year was 34 yards last year. It kind of reminds you of the Rams to a degree, where they, when they ran it, they were all right, but they had no threat of the explosive run. So you don't need to recruit as many resources defensively to slow them down, especially if you're like a team where you're willing to give up a first down or two and then put the clamps on and try to stall teams out around the 40, make them kick long field goals or go 4 and out. So yeah, I think it's a combination of factors, which is not a dedication to installing like complementary and effective run schemes, not having explosive backs, and just not committing to the run game in general and wearing down the defense in that facet of the game consistently. So that's one factor. Now, Mahomes, the scrambling, it's always going to be a problem. The Eagles, they cannot bank on what they did in the Super Bowl. I don't think that's something that you can necessarily count on. First off, even if their pressure was like almost as good as what they did then, Mahomes would probably make better adjustments, probably still be able to scramble out of more of those scenarios. They missed throws in the Super Bowl that were there. I probably counted like 4 or 5 throws in the first half alone where I was shocked, like, why is he turning that down? Guys there, pump fakes. And then when he started turning it down and getting sacked every time, then he started rushing it. It was like it was either too slow or too fast. So I don't think the Chiefs offense, especially with them being undermanned now, is that scary. But Mahomes, he can just ad lib and hurt you. And so that still would be my big focus, is like, how are we going to use the edges? How are we going to use the linebackers to corral him? Because even against the Chargers, that's where he was making a lot of his magic happen. Going to the Eagles offense, like I said earlier, I think you know this chief safeties and their nickel corners, I don't think they're that instinctive, potentially low football IQs. I don't think they're fast either. So like just physically they can be exploited, mentally too. I don't think they're that good players in general. I don't think Cook is that good a player. Hicks has a ways to go. He's just in his second year. And he didn't play at full-time snaps last year. And I think Chamari Connor, while he played good, kind of surprisingly so last year, maybe now teams are realizing like they can attack this guy. So there's a lot of guys that can attack. Jalen Watson, while I think he's like probably a serviceable third corner on the outside, do you want him playing full-time snaps on the outside? I don't necessarily know. So now they have McDuffie on the outside. Like he'll moonlight inside, but it seems like they don't have anyone else to go to. Like they've got a bunch of guys they could put in the slot, but not a lot of guys they can put out on the outside. They're putting McDuffie on the outside. He's good there. He's really good in the slot. So, I understand why they want to use him there. It's another reason why you don't want to play a bunch of condensed formations and invite Spagnuolo's safeties and nickels to blitz you. I'll say this. If the Eagles do that, it's a really dumb plan. So they should definitely spread this field out and attack the guys I just said. Watson, Cook, Hicks, Connor. Matchup advantages across the board there. They're going to drive on some of these plays that the Eagles put on film last week, and there's going to be multiple opportunities to hit them with double moves or attack them deep, and I hope they do that. I think the Chiefs, their run defense, I think it'll be probably above average. First off, a lot of times they'll put a bunch of linebackers out there. I mean, when you have Chris Jones in the middle and you got Tranquil, Bolton, maybe throw in Chanel, and you maybe even drop a safety down, that's going to be a good run defense. And so do I think just because the Chiefs didn't have success in the Super Bowl, they're going to be like, oh, maybe we won't recruit as much players to stopping Saquon? Absolutely not. I think they still, like, Spagnuolo is going to be like intent that, no, we got to do that again. And we got to do these other things to make sure, like, a lot of them, like, they had multiple coverage busts in the Super Bowl. Like, yeah, sometimes the Eagles just beat them, but like a lot of times they screwed it up. That said, week 1, their guys looked like chickens with their head cut off. Oh, where should I be looking? In zone coverage. You got him. No, you got him. Bump, literally running into each other 5 or 6 times on film. And like, to what extent is that Chargers running route combinations that are like conducive to making the defenders run into each other? I don't know that. I probably would not make that claim. But like that, what that is exemplary of a rusty week 1 defense, of course, but you're still shaking off the rust in week 2, probably up to week 6. And potentially a defense that is not that talented, who was a lot of smoke and mirrors last year to get by. So there's going to be guys running wide open. I feel really confident in that. The Chiefs had some bizarre defenses. Like week 1 against the Chargers, you would see like a cover 3, but their interior defenders, like hook defenders, would all be sandwiched in the middle of the field, like 3 or 4 yards from each other. It made no sense. Like, yes, I understand the Chargers love to run these like crossers and hook routes in the middle, but like that is terrible spacing, and it hurt them bad. Okay, I know I skipped over some questions here. Larry said, last week it felt like Sirianni and his influence on the offense had his influence on the offense. It was very vanilla and basic. Was this a facade? Will the offense look different? I mean, I don't know any more than anyone else to answer that question. I don't think so. Every indication was from Patullo in the offseason that they would build off what they've already done. They have their staple plays, many of which were successful. A lot of their passing concepts against 2 high zone were not that successful. That's where I would focus improving. Are you just going to make subtle tweaks and fix that? I don't think so. I think you need to have a concerted effort and potentially new designs to do that. I was recently having a conversation with Honest NFL, and I said, okay, the Eagles love to run this China concept, 72 follow, whatever you want to call it. It's a little, 3 to 4 yard in route from the outside paired with a guy in the slot running a corner, right? That's all it is. I said, what can you run off that? What's a good play to scaffold off that to take advantage of defenses? You saw the Cowboys literally just sitting on that all game. It was never even remotely close to open. What can you do? And one of the things he showed me was pirate. So you keep that outside route. Really, this is what defines the China, right? It's this outside little in. 2-man combination. And instead of running the corner, now you run a basic. So you could call that, a 10 to 12 yard in route, vary the depths. Some people call that levels. So now when you have that, whether it's the cloud corner dropping back to try to take away the corner, or you have the safety driving on the corner, or you have the hook defender cheating out, or to try to take away the in. Now that in route, at a deeper depth, that can get wide open. So I'd love to see some counter plays off of that concept. I think they have an opportunity to take advantage of defensives that are sitting on those, smash concepts. Like last week, we saw twice they ran this condensed stacks on both sides, and then they ran this mirrored concept. What it looked like was essentially like a guy runs out about 6 yards, stops and turns around, and then the other guy runs like a corner route. A mirrored concept on both sides. There's only very specific coverages that's going to get open against. And I wrote a whole thread on Twitter about tweaks that you could make to some of the plays they ran. It wasn't necessarily like a critique on the play saying this would have been better. It was like, here's how you could adjust them if a team was ready for those other plays to take advantage of how the defense would play them. And that was one of the examples where, keep that concept with the hook in the corner on one side, but on the other side, have some kind of like drive concept where you've got a shallow cross and an in. Because if you're reading the choice corner and there's nothing there, well, you can't come back to a choice corner. It's way too late. So you need other players coming across the field, take longer developing routes that come into your vision. That would be much more effective. Now, why would the Eagles not be doing that? It's clear. Well, I don't know the answer. But what I think is they get up to the line and they're saying, okay, where's my matchup advantage? It's zone coverage. Theoretically, it's going to be the same type of zone on either side. Do I like Goddard and AJ, or do I like Jahan and Dotson and Barkley? And then I'm just going to read that side, and it's irrelevant that they're mirrored. But I have my criticisms of that. But also, I don't know if that's true. All right, got a lot more questions in here. Why couldn't we beat that zone they were playing? I mean, Jalen did make them pay for it, but we couldn't scheme up deep balls. Oh, I don't know if you heard me talk about this earlier, but it was a combination of 3 factors. One is the play design actually conducive to attacking zone? And that's from the formation to where the players are actually in that personnel package, and then the actual route combinations. It's the timing. And it's the actual players you're trying to attack. So, if you're not on time to throw between windows and you're not conflicting zone defenders and creating enough space between your routes, you're going to have a hard time. I don't know if maybe I already answered that. All right. Got more questions here. Going with the unlikely assumption that Nakobe Dean will return at full performance as before, where would he find a role in this defense with Jihad Campbell looking as good as he is? I mean, you could start to think about short yardage situation, red zone situation, situations where it's obvious run scenarios, perhaps like the other team is up a score or something like this. That's really where I would see it predominantly. I think people have talked about, like, are you going to see a bunch of sets with 3 linebackers on the field? I've been surprised that people are convinced that will happen a fair amount. I don't agree. Uh, if they do that, they'll walk one of them up on the line. So they'll come out with three. However, the offense formation presents itself, boom, they'll just automatically drop one of those guys on the line, and they've got a 5-2. It could be their quasi base, sure, but like, yeah, I definitely could see that. But that would really be in like neutral down and distance situations, because you'd rather just have a true base with 5 defensive linemen when you know they're gonna run. In the in-betweeners, that's where you could be like actually benefiting from having 3 linebackers on the field and dropping one down. All right, I'll answer a few more and then I'll get out of here. Krabby asks, what's the chance of Dotson and Devontae taking on the usual number of passes we'd expect if AJ Brown were healthy? It's a little hard to parse that question, but I guess what you're trying to say is, I guess you're saying, could they supplant his production? My answer is no. No, they've never shown that they've been able to do that in the past when AJ Brown is out. There's nothing to me that would indicate they could do that if it happened in the future. If that's your question. Brad Eclipse says, I'm clueless about scheme stuff, but Spagnola and Bowles' defense seems similar philosophically. Why does Hurts consistently torch one but looks awful against the other? Yeah, I think it's just, yeah, that's, well, it's a nuanced question, because if you're going to characterize a like man heavy pressure defense that likes to use like simulated pressures and rotations on the back end, and say that they're cut from the same cloth, I understand that. But I think it's more in the details that it really differs. Like, I think Spagnola is more like man pressure heavy, whereas Bowles is more like zone pressure heavy. You'll see, I think, let me just be very concrete about this. Bowles, he'll bring 6 or 7 men directly on the line, and he'll blitz your butt. And that gives the Eagles problems. Point blank, period. He'll show that same thing, and then he'll have some kind of unorthodox rotation in the back end that replaces a blitzer in coverage and surprises the offense because they thought they could attack it. Whereas Spagnola, it'll be like calling a coverage where, oh, if the X receiver is in a condensed alignment, boom, automatically we're checking to this corner blitz, like situational type stuff. And I think that like all out aggression tends to be more effective. And we did see it in the Super Bowl. Like when Spagnola had that clever rotation on the back end, they got Hurts for the interception with Cook. But there was just too many times where, and I wrote about this in my preview, where they just lined up in your traditional defensive alignment, and then like they brought one backer. And I'm like, why would you ever do that? Like, it makes no sense against the Eagles. If you watch them on film, every single time random defenses are playing amoeba fronts and double monk fronts and bringing a bunch of guys, they're having like tons of issues. But then when you just like have a 4-man front, drop an edge, and bring a linebacker, Hurts sits back in the pocket all day and dices you. To me, and it may, it's funny criticizing one of the best defensive coordinators of all time, and I'm a podcaster, but like I thought it was a bad game plan. it didn't make sense if you scouted them that that's how you'd attack. And to me, it's more of a product of they're just so intent on stopping Saquon. A lot of the other stuff went out the window, and I understand that. But maybe they put too many eggs in one basket. So that's going to wrap it up. If you have any more questions, you can always shoot me on Twitter. I'm very responsive and love answering questions. My game prediction was 27-23 Eagles. A bunch of frustrating Mahomes scrambling plays. So try not to yell at your TV when it happens. But ultimately, the talent prevails. Until next time, go Birds.